Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another installment of Talking Marijuana. Let's see if I move out of the way there. You can kind of see our logo. Talking Marijuana. We are your hosts. I'm Barry Kramer. I am the patient operator of California Patients Alliance on Melrose in Los Angeles. If you're a patient in Los Angeles, come on by and see us sometime.
Hi, my name is Yami Bolaños, and I am patient operator for Pure Life in Hollywood. And I'm also the president and founder of the Greater Los Angeles Collectives Alliance. And in studio today, we have
Diane Goldstein representing LEAP Tuesdays now, once a month, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, as well as being the chief of staff for Dale Sky Jones for the Coalition for Cannabis Policy Reform in California.
Diane's one of our most favorite guests to have on here. We never get to talk about all the things we want to talk about, and we have so much to talk about today. I think we're going to start in California, and it's our home state, and we're going to do a little bit on California today. There's been a lot of action. There's a couple of bills that are coming up in the Senate, in the legislature that we're going to talk about. There has been a Democratic party conference for their platform that went on this past week. We have some other legislation that's going on in Sacramento. And we also have our third host, Duncan, the director for California of ASA. And he's in Sacramento as we tape this. He's there in a committee meeting for Carrera, right? It's the...
I believe so, but he's going to be calling in a few minutes, and he'll
let
us know exactly what he's doing and who he's doing with.
Show.
It's the Fresno bill that would, that's the 1,000-foot bill.
The 1,000-foot today,
bill.
yeah, which ASA is in opposition to because it would disrupt so many cities that already exist.
Right.
Yes, it's 1,000 feet from schools. That's what they're talking about this morning.
Well, let's start. We're also later on today. We're going to talk about Sanjay Gupta and his continued change of heart and conversion to medical marijuana advocacy, I would say at this point. He's on the roll as an advocate of the year, and some other stories that are going on around the country. But let's start here in California. Let's start with our legislative bills that are coming up. We have
Don's on the phone.
Hey, what do you know? Don's called in, so he's probably on a quick break from the committee, so we'll put him in and we'll start to chat with him a little bit.
Perfect time for a legislative update.
Hey there.
Hi, honey.
Hi, everybody. How's the sound?
Nice. Skype from your phone now. It's great.
Well, great. Well, I have really great news to report live from Sacramento.
Let's go.
AB 1588 was defeated today.
Yay! That's good.
That's awesome. Let's tell our patient
embarrassing anecdote to tell you how quickly our government can move and how slowly I can move. I got there, I checked in, I got the agenda, and went downstairs for coffee. And when I got up, it was dead. The bill was killed.
Oh wow, that's great! I wish everything else that we wanted to died that quickly.
Quick death like that.
After all.
You want to tell our
here with the ASA crew in Sacramento. You guys can come around if you want to.
Awesome. Congratulations to the ASA crew. Good work.
So yeah.
Good work.
Good work.
Yeah, great. Hey Don, you want to explain to people exactly what the bill was that went down?
Yeah, a quick update. And my apologies for the camera angle. I'm just sort of doing this on the fly today.
It's great.
So AB 1588 was a bill by Assemblymember Connie Conway. And what this would have done is required a 1,000-foot buffer zone between medical marijuana dispensaries and schools statewide. And that would be regardless of what the city wanted to do moving forward. So if a city or county wanted to do a 500-foot buffer zone, they wouldn't be allowed to under this bill. Now, it grandfathered existing ordinances, which was a good concession. But it's just an unnecessary provision. The author said she was doing it to comply with the Drug-Free School Act, which of course does not require that states or cities have 1,000-foot buffer zones between collectives and schools. In fact, it doesn't even mention medical marijuana collectives. And so really this is sort of a giveaway bill for law enforcement and for people who are ambivalent or opposed to medical marijuana. And so the committee, I think, saw very clearly this bill wasn't necessary and voted, frankly, along party lines to defeat it. So AB 1588, 2 years in a row now, has been defeated, and there will be no mandatory 1,000-foot buffer zone.
That's great news.
Great.
Really good news and a good victory.
So, Don, I want to ask about a couple bills, and only from a time factor is I see Senator Correa has introduced two bills. Both of them, one of them at least is a little bit workable, and I think we can move towards amending as long as they listen to patient advocates, which is the California League of Cities bill with the California Police Chiefs Organization, and then I also want to discuss the zero tolerance DUID bill. that we absolutely need to flat out oppose because it's both unconstitutional and bad science, and it will wrap up way too many citizens into the criminal justice system as far as LEAP is concerned and as
Absolutely.
I'm concerned.
I'll start with AB 2500, the DUI bill. That's a bill by Assemblymember Frazier, and it's just really a bad idea because even if you're not impaired by cannabis, you're still going to test positive for cannabis in a blood test. You'll test positive in cannabis for anywhere from a few days to a few weeks, depending on how often you use it. So this isn't a bill based on the science of cannabis impairment, and nobody wants impaired drivers on the road, cannabis or alcohol or anything else. But this bill doesn't test for impairment; it just tests for the presence of THC in the blood, which for a regular cannabis user, medical or otherwise, is always going to be present.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have to defeat the bill. We actually beat this bill back last year when Senator Correa was the author, and now Assemblymember Frazier has taken the mantle and is running with it. I'm pretty confident we'll be able to defeat it again, but what it took last year was a really robust grassroots presence to fight back on the bill. I know Senator Correa took a lot of heat in his home district over what was then AB 689.
Actually, it was a Senate bill, and interesting enough, this will be the third zero tolerance bill because you have to remember Norma Torres introduced the year before. And,
and then Korea,
and then Korea did it because the advocates, and again, it's the voice of advocacy that's so important, is from LEAP to NORML to ASA to Libertarian, freedom-loving organizations all publicly opposed it based on the subversion of constitutional rights as well as the lack of science because it's just bad policy.
Right.
It is bad policy, and it's sort of a knee-jerk reaction that when these things come up and lawmakers get behind it because they want to be tough on crime and tough on drugs, and they just don't think it through. Last year when that bill was in committee hearing and ultimately defeated, we were standing outside picketing. So it takes all sorts of things. We write letters, we make phone calls, we go to committee hearings, and on that day we stood out on the lawn and just shouted.
Do you know when that's going to public safety?
I have not yet seen a committee date for that. I think we're probably early next month, but I'm just guessing right now.
Time to start drafting letters.
Right, drafting
Absolutely.
letters,
and
the time
get in
to
your support or opposition as early as it's practical. However, the Korea bill is the new Korea bill, AB 1262, is a really different animal. Because that bill actually has some common sense stuff in it that we really like, and then it's got some really bad stuff in there we don't like, which is always a hard position. I'm happy to report that Senator Correa has been remarkably open to talking with advocates about from the medical cannabis side. In fact, I was able to meet in person with him to talk about the bill, which was very generous of him, and he called to follow up afterwards to check in again. And I've met on several occasions with his staff. Just yesterday afternoon, I sent 6 pages of suggested amendments to that bill to his staff and to the sponsors at the League of Cities, who have also been just really, really receptive, surprisingly receptive to input from advocates. And so I think they're being sincere in an effort to reach out and sort of listen to everybody. Now, whether or not that results in a better bill, time will tell. So we may still have to be opposed to this bill, but I'm really hoping we can find enough common ground with the Korea bill that the advocates and the League of Cities and law enforcement can all stand behind Senator Korea and finally get a regulatory bill passed this year.
So here's my 2 cents, only coming from the law enforcement perspective and understanding the California Police Chief's president, Kim Rainey, who is a prohibitionist to the umpteenth level. and I just want to caution us as advocates because he is continuing to oppose any unrestricting of amendments. So his statement, and he made it pretty clear in his opinion publicly to Peter Hecht at the Sacramento Bee when he said, those people are not credible, referring to us specifically.
Yes.
And so I think what we need to do is really work with Senator Correa, and I'm in Orange County, Don, so I'm more than happy to step into his office, which is around the corner from where I live.
Stop by for sure. I'll send you my memo.
Would you please? Because I'll set up an appointment to go down there.
This is how activism works, by the way. Oh, you know this person, and I'm here, so let's get you over there and do it. That's how it works, everybody out there.
Advocacy is very important because they need to know people in their entire district to
Yeah,
vote.
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, and so I want, the backdoor rumblings I'm hearing is that this is, although the chiefs and the California League of Cities have recognized that they need to get involved in the process, that they're still going to stymie us in every way, shape, or form possible, and that this is
I've
just
heard that
window
too.
dressing to make us seem to think that they're listening to us.
Well, yes, and obviously something is happening with the senator and the sponsors. There's a little bit of showmanship in politics, and they need to be seen as talking to everybody.
Absolutely.
So we'll see how much of our input winds up actually helping this bill. One of the strategies I've adopted is I have not announced any opposition or support for the bill yet. We're playing it a little bit coy because we want to leave that chip on the table.
Right.
I also heard from the League of Cities, with whom I've worked much more closely than law enforcement, and I heard from the League of Cities that they want 100% control over amendments, and sponsors often say that. I've said that before in sponsoring bills, but the truth is the author will ultimately decide whether or not to grant amendments.
Yep.
And we still haven't heard from some really big players in the room on this bill, the Korea bill. We haven't heard from the California Medical Association. And we have not yet heard back from some of the other lawmakers who are key players, including Democratic leadership in the Assembly and the Senate, and Assemblymember Tom Mariuana, whose bill AB 604, which has a very differing approach to regulating medical cannabis, is still on the floor. It may be that what you see is a synergy between these two bills, where they start overlapping a little bit, and Mr. Amiano will take some of the provisions of the Korea bill. Mr. Korea will take some of Amiano's provisions. These things might meet in the middle somewhere. And so that's another way this could play out, where both bills don't have to move, but they can still influence one another. So it should be a busy time in Sacramento.
I think that's great, and my concern is that I keep hearing is that Department of Public Health and the counties associations are going to oppose because it places undue burdens on them, and that public health really doesn't want it. And
Right.
I
I don't think they want it, and my answer is tough.
Yeah, sometimes that doesn't.
Well, no, I understand that, but I think that we need to make it so. In a perfect world, is if they have the strength and the counties have the strength to oppose it and kill it, that we take those public health portions of it and put it into Amiano's bill.
Absolutely.
No different than kind of like Colorado does it, where you have a marijuana enforcement division that's both medical and now adult recreational legal.
And in
we're not quite there in California
No,
yet.
correct.
But, I do think ultimately there'll be what we call a bifurcated approach to this, a regulatory approach, because obviously the Department of Agriculture should be involved in cultivation.
Absolutely.
Public health needs to be involved in the medical and clinical aspects of it, and there's always going to be a role for law enforcement. I know some of our people don't like to acknowledge that, but the fact is, if we have a law, it has to be enforced, and that falls to law enforcement. So I wouldn't say there's no role for ABC to play. I just don't want medical cannabis regulated like a vice. It's
Correct.
not tobacco, it's not alcohol. It's medicine.
We're noticing this week that in Washington State, there in the Senate, the bill passed in the Senate to regulate and to try to fix the disparity between medical and legal, and now they goes to the House side of their legislature to kind of meet in the middle and see where they're going to compromise on this, but it wasn't even that much of a greater respect for patients in the Senate bill.
It allows commercial cultivation, which is a huge step forward. And by the way, hats off to the folks at the Health Before Happy Hour campaign up in Washington State. They have done an amazing job of pushing that. That issue forward and sort of reclaiming some of the ground that the alcohol board there was was taking away from medical cannabis.
My understanding is that they're changing the name of the.
Soon, I'm afraid we can't stick around. We've got to get back over to the Capitol.
Well, that's okay. We're going to say goodbye and send off this segment. So it's perfect timing to say goodbye to you and get back to work out there in Sacramento. Thanks for Skyping in. We wanted the update on that. And congratulations to all of you ASA people out there for the great work that you continually do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and see you in studio next week, baby.
All
Bye,
right,
Don.
see you then. Eugene's coming.
Yes.
Next week, we're going to
Bye-bye.
have Eugene Davidovich
From
from down
Diego.
in San Diego. We're going to devote the whole hour to talking about San Diego and what's going on down there. And let's take a little break. When we come back, let's continue our conversation about California. We've only touched the tip of the iceberg here. We'll see you right after
Thank
this
you.
break.
Hi, I'm John Lovitz, broadcasting to you from the John Lovitz Comedy Club at Universal City in Hollywood. And I'd like to invite you to come down every Tuesday at 8 o'clock. We tape all these great comics at the John Lovitz Comedy Club, and there is no cover charge, and there's no 2-item minimum. Just come on in, get something to eat if you'd like, and enjoy these fabulous new comedians. And you can see them on the John Lovitz Comedy Network. But come down to the taping live every Tuesday at 8 p.m. at the John Lovitz Comedy Club and Podcast Theater at Universal City Walk in Hollywood.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to Talking Marijuana. We are here with Diane Goldstein from LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and we're talking California at the moment. We've been talking about a bill that our co-host Duncan was in Sacramento to see go down in defeat. Excellently done. And we had a couple other bills that we wanted to discuss. One, Diane, was the liver transplant bill that you wanted to just touch on. We've touched on it many times here on the show, but I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
So, Yami, I think this is so obviously because it is about you. I like it when we can make
We can be
things-
specific.
We can be specific. Do you think with the recent passing of the Democratic plank at the convention center just this last week, saying that, now it was voted on, the Democratic plank, one of them is going to be to support the regulation of marijuana similar to alcohol or tobacco. Do you think that you will finally be able to get an author to see your bill through, given that we've created that safe
Right.
space for them to say this isn't an issue amongst Democrats anymore?
It's on our plank now. Yeah.
It's on our plank. It was really important that we get this plank passed because I was up in Sacramento with Duncan trying to get an author for the bill. The bill
Explain the bill.
The bill, what it does is, it right now, if you use medical marijuana and you're on a transplant list, if you're still using when your time comes up, they can say, no, you can't have it. A gentleman by the name of Norman Smith just died out of Cedars-Sinai last year. Yep. He was using medical marijuana for his chemotherapy treatments, and his number came up. They had a liver, and they tested him. He tested, that he was using marijuana, positive. I was going to say he tested dirty, but I don't want to say it like that.
No,
Because that's
positive.
not,
It's-
he just
he's a
tested for
patient.
medical marijuana, and so they refused him the liver transplant, and so he died. And I've told this story so many times. I was told myself that I wouldn't be transplanted because of my medical marijuana use, but 6 months ago, as I was being released from the hospital, they recommended that I keep using it. So,
Wow.
so that was what gave
I don't think
me,
it was a recommendation. I think it was actually a
They
prescription.
prescribed
which
that I
was
use it.
unheard
I'm
of.
like,
Did they write you a prescription?
Yes.
Yeah,
And so, like,
absolutely.
I was being
Which
discharged
is-
from the hospital.
That's
Federally
huge.
illegal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
to
but
do.
so I'm being discharged from the hospital, and my daughter's going, "Hey, Mom, they just prescribed the marijuana." I'm like, "What?" And I'm like calling Don. We have this piece of paper that I
That's
can
a
go to
big-
Sacramento now
Absolutely.
and say, "So what do I do?" They told me they wouldn't do it, but now they're recommending that I use it
Yeah.
because it's doing so well. So anyway, this liver transplant bill, what it is that it will stop people from dying in the state of California if they need a transplant, if they're using medical marijuana. There's other reasons why you can be disqualified or taken off the list.
Sure.
And that's all good. What we don't want is for you to be taken off the list if you're a medical marijuana patient. If you're using marijuana as medicine, there shouldn't be any reason why you can't be transplanted again. or transplant it,
Right.
the first time. Yeah,
First time.
I'm
And
talking about me.
And so
because
you've
I'm
been
already
having
transplanted.
trouble finding an author, someone to sign on as the author of
Yes.
this bill.
Mr.
But now we have a little bit of
So what happened was that we had the language submitted to the legal department. It came back with its little barcodes, which I showed everybody at the Democratic conference this weekend, that actually the language had come back perfect. There was no objections to anything. All I needed was an author. That's all I needed. And I talked to 20 people in Sacramento trying to get an author. And we were told that the Democratic leadership had told everyone not to get involved in anything that had to do with cannabis because they were afraid they would lose votes. And if they lost votes, they would lose representatives. So, so when did the benefit or, when did the benefit or
Change
the
the thought-
change?
change-
Yeah,
yeah.
the
change
thought
their
changed
thought.
that we're supposed to protect, the elected officials over the constituency, which is me. So it was more important to have more votes than it was for me to stay alive in case my number comes up and they won't transplant me.
Your story, Yami, is the perfect example of how prohibition, period, whether it's of marijuana or whether it's over other illicit substances, really supports death, disease, and addiction in our society. And it's shameful to me that we have both law enforcement professionals as well as our elected officials who have lost sight of the purpose of their job and that they are willing to sacrifice a constituent to die. Literally.
Yeah.
This is no different than if your child can benefit from medical marijuana and they need a transplant, your child could be denied a beneficial medical procedure. And until we hammer these people to show them the lack of ethics.
Exactly.
And I don't want to call out any politicians in particular or by name but I think this.
We'll do that.
Yeah,
You don't have to.
But I think that there's ways that we can do it that
Don't put them on the defensive.
don't put them on the defensive.
sure.
And what we have to do is we have to qualify it. So I write a lot about unconstitutional body cavity searches. And in some of the articles that I've written, I've always ended it is these practices will stop when it's a police officer's daughter or wife
Exactly.
or a politician's daughter or wife who's a medical marijuana patient
Right.
and needs a transplant and dies. And I don't wish bad on anybody. But, I don't wish bad on anybody
But
with
if you
regard.
can't use your cognitive thought
but
to
if
come
you-
to a
but-
real
but-
conclusion, then sometimes examples are the only way that it happens. And though you don't wish bad on
I don't
someone,
wish bad on people. No.
that may be the only way to turn some people's
and it's
minds.
horrible.
Well, now with this plank that was added on this weekend that I'm going to read, we were very, very proud of the fact that our political outreach person, Sarah Armstrong, wrote the plank and it was accepted, except for a change of a the and an a. It was accepted
that's
in its total
fabulous.
form that she wrote it. So we're very proud of her. But now with this plank, I'm very, happy that that's happened because now they can't tell me that if I ask them to endorse something or to author something, that's going to take away from their, voting because there's a plank that's instructing
Them to support it.
To support it. So that was very important that happened. Now, do I think that I'm going to get an author? I believe I'm going to get an author this year.
She's going to make sure somebody authors
I
this.
think that, I made a couple people feel bad this weekend when I talked to them because really, how do you say die?
Yeah.
That's what they're telling me, die.
Yeah.
And-
It was interesting before you read the plank. I think what I took away from being up at the Democratic Convention was in talking to people who were approaching the Brownie Mary Democratic booth was there were a number of people that were ambivalent and used those words very specifically about marijuana. And it was amazing that by sitting there for 5 minutes to tie in your story and different pieces, all of a sudden they went,
Education.
oh my God, I didn't realize that marijuana prohibition
Affected those
all these issues. And it's like the only reason it doesn't affect you in some aspect is because the number of people that were making that comment were privileged white people.
Right.
I'm sorry to say it that way, but these were folks that had the economic resources to deal with issues or had, opportunities that other folks didn't. And so it didn't affect them personally. And until you really sit down and educate them. And I can't begin to tell you how many people I talked to that I talked about. Oh, and see her over there?
That was the example.
This is her issue, and they've told her it's okay for her to die.
Yes.
And once again, this is really, this is how advocacy works. We've been talking about this bill that you would like to introduce for years, Yami. You've been wanting to bring this bill up for years, and it hasn't really been its time. Now it's its time, but what really happened this past weekend here in Los Angeles was there was a Democratic Party convention where they were going to decide on their platform for the state of California. And for the first time in history, and because of the real work of advocates, there is representatives at that Democratic Party convention. It was called the Brownie Mary Club.
It is called the Brownie Mary.
We had one of our great guests, Lanny Swerdlow. He's on here a couple of times, and both times he was on talking about Brownie Mary Club. And at that point, there was only one chapter, and it was his chapter from Riverside. At this point now, we have four chapters representing a much broader swath of California. And because they've participated in the structure that's set up, which is our political, two-party structure, they were able to get put into the actual foundation of what our party's going to run on in this year, 2 planks, one that Lanny put up and one that Sarah Armstrong put up. Just congratulate both of those people for really pushing forward on these. But both those planks are important. And to reiterate again, Lanny's is about legalization, moving the legalization effort forward. And that allows, again, for our politicians to take a stand. It's in our plank. We can do that. And Sarah's, did you want to read a little bit of that?
Yes, I do want to read
let
Sarah's
people know what that was?
plank. I'm very proud of it. Very proud of her. Okay, so for the first time, this isn't what she wrote. This is the description, okay? For the first time in its history, the California Democratic Party platform has acknowledged that the civil rights of cannabis patients have been seriously eroded. In recognition of the situation, the party has included a plank addressing the issue. Enact legislation to remedy any uncertainty concerning dispensing of medical cannabis with regard to state law that will provide for the rights of medical cannabis patients and specify the means and manner of dispensing to qualified patients. Thank you, Mrs. Sarah Armstrong.
And this is the way to protect medical marijuana in California, unlike what's happened in Washington that we've now seen a pretty dramatic, we see that medical marijuana is being folded into legalization and patients are losing rights that they fought for many years. We're trying to stop that here in California and in other states that move forward with this by education.
Yeah, and I think the importance of this is it really calls our legislators out who have had many opportunities since 1996 when Prop 215 was passed to fix the issues and the problems. And it took a long time for Colorado, as an example. I think it took them, 6 or 7 years to really fix their medical marijuana. But it was because of the work that they did in establishing the regulatory process that some people were happy, some people weren't, but, legislation and laws are ugly, and not everybody walks away with everything that they want.
Usually you don't.
And usually you don't.
And
you have to compromise, and I think that's my biggest frustration with dealing with activism sometimes, is that people are unwilling to compromise, and they want the perfect ballot initiative or the perfect bill, and it's not going to happen. And until we recognize that, we're going to continue to stall the process, and we're going to continue in these fights in California, and more people are going to go to jail, and more people are going to die.
Absolutely.
And I really think it's selfish for people sometimes. It's, take a step back and say, let's get this done, and then let's correct things that aren't working, because that's what the government process is you're always in a state of
fixing.
And
you're always constructing something.
and it's just constructing, and it's like, okay, this didn't work, let's
flip that and start
portion, and
else.
let's install this. But no matter what we need from any of these laws is we need to conduct policy assessment using our academic researchers, not using political rhetoric or law enforcement rhetoric.
One of the interesting
Science.
things this
Yes,
week is, and tonight, although those of you viewing this is probably past Tuesday, but this Tuesday night, tonight, Dr. Sanjay Gupta is coming on with another documentary about marijuana. And my understanding is, from what he's written about it and talked about this week promoting it, he's going after the federal policies, the lies that this government has been giving us, and the hesitation to just do what he did, which is to say, you know what? I'm sorry, I was wrong, let's correct this. And the reason he's doing that is exactly what you were talking about before with the liver transplant bill, is that people are dying, and this country should not allow people to die when there's an easy fix to this and a logical fix to this. And let's come back and we'll talk about what Sanjay is going to talk about tonight. We're going to take a little break here, and then we'll continue with that conversation. Okay.
Hi, I'm John Lovitz, broadcasting to you from the John Lovitz Comedy Club at Universal City in Hollywood. And I'd like to invite you to come down every Tuesday at 8 o'clock. We tape all these great comics at the John Lovitz Comedy Club, and there is no cover charge, and there's no 2-item minimum. Just come on in, get something to eat if you'd like, and enjoy these fabulous new comedians. And you can see them on the John Lovitz Comedy Network. But come down to the taping live every Tuesday at 8 p.m. at the John Lovitz Comedy Club and Podcast Theater at Universal City Walk in Hollywood.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the discussion. We're talking marijuana, and we're talking about right now Sanjay Gupta's special that's going to be airing this evening. You guys might have seen it already in podcast world, but the great switch this time around. People have asked him why. You did this 8 months ago. You came out with a statement. You did a documentary. It really exposed problems that were going on with medical marijuana, and highlighted Charlotte Figgis, who is now famous for this Charlotte's Web strain that will help children in epileptic fits. Why are you doing another documentary right now? And he says he found so much wrong with his way of thinking previous to that documentary. And he finds so much contention with the fact that he changed his position. He has a lot of effort to have him stop talking about what he's talking about. And
getting pushback.
And the big headline this week is that he says, instead of leaving marijuana, I am doubling down on medical marijuana. He's seen more continually since he's made that first documentary. He's just seen how it's affecting families,
Countless
communities, whole organizations. Let me read a little bit about what's going on, and we'll probably talk about this next week as well after it airs tonight. He has basically this week called for a full-scale federal legalization of medical marijuana in no uncertain terms. In terms of making this legal for medicinal purpose, yes, he says. There are both very pragmatic reasons and more subjective reasons. He added that the federal legalization of medical cannabis should happen if for no other reason than to address the ridiculousness of the refugee situation in Colorado. We've spoken about this on the show here, that at least 100 families, most likely more now, it's in the hundreds, have lifted up their lives and moved to Colorado because they can't just go to Colorado and get the medicine for their child.
Yep.
Because if they leave Colorado with that medicine, they're committing a federal offense
Crime.
that they could go to jail
Yep.
for.
Exactly.
And Sanjay says this is not what America is about.
Yep.
That you can go to Colorado, have to move your family there to get this medicine, but you can't return to your home, to where you live, your community. This is not right. And him shining the light on that is huge. I put him into an advocacy role now, you know.
Oh, yes.
He's not only just trying to educate people,
He's
which
trying
is
to end it.
advocacy. He's in it. He's saying change this system.
Yeah, I think all of us are getting whiplash at the speed of light.
Yeah,
my
what's going
God,
on?
you are
That is
right.
what is going on, not just locally, at the state level, at the national level, at the global level, is amazing. And, there's the whole issue of technology has helped us be able to spread the message. Alternative media has been one of the driving factors behind
Moving this so
moving
Yes,
this so quickly, and now mainstream media has had to adopt alternative media and making this into a serious drug policy issue. Well, since I was on in January, in the last 2 months, there's been 2 separate Senate hearings that have revolved around marijuana specifically. One of them, Michael Botticelli, who's the new deputy director of the National Drug Control Policy, which I believe that the president needs to be commended for, because for the first time since like the Jimmy Carter days, a non-law enforcement person is now in charge
position.
as the drug czar.
What is his background?
He's holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree and from Siena College, a Master's of Education degree, and he is a long-term recovery from addiction. So he's a former addict. And he believes in harm reduction. He believes in rehabilitation and treatment. And although the funding mechanisms aren't changing at the level that I think they should be
not
at,
yet.
but this tells me that, and it'll only last as long as as it works, But he took a beating at the hands of Senator Cohen for not responding to the marijuana question, and he finally reluctantly admitted that yes, marijuana is safer than alcohol. Unlike the DEA counterparts.
Right.
But what's been really interesting is one of the things that most Americans don't realize is since the Drug Czar's office started, is there has been a law that has said that the federal government cannot spend any federal money or support the legalization or the study towards the efficacy of any Schedule I drug. There's a law.
Yeah.
Right. He's not allowed.
He's
by
not
law,
allowed
to
by
say that.
law to talk about it, to put money into research, only to show the negative effects.
So at this point, if he were given a scientific document stamped and approved by every scientist in the world that said medical marijuana is an effective medicine, he could not legally
Correct.
acknowledge that piece of paper.
And that's been the issue with the DEA and
Of
with
course.
law enforcement and with everyone else, is because we have propped up a regime that is based on confirmation bias.
Yeah.
It's not based on really looking at a scientific academic research. So Cohen recently introduced the Unmuzzle the Drug Czar bill that would remove that
great.
Portion of the
from the federal level. And so I think it's really important for all the advocates that we have here is to contact your congressional representatives and your state senators to say, you need to support this bill. This bill is a no-brainer. We need to design our drug policies based on a fact, science, best practice, and the only way to get that is by presenting all sides of an argument
Absolutely.
and academic research.
Absolutely.
So that's a huge issue tying along with exactly what's in Jay Gupta's saying. It's the
Exactly.
perfect nexus.
Here's what he says. Sanjay says, what I found with medical marijuana was that as I dug deeper, it all really held up. Not only is it real, the mechanisms by which it works are pretty well described and elucidated by a lot of scientists around the world. The therapeutic benefits have squarely moved out of the realm of the anecdotal into science, peer-reviewed science. And it doesn't get sketchier or blurrier or more opaque. It actually becomes clearer as you dig deeper. So my focus has been on medical marijuana and making it available as a real option to needy patients. It just doesn't meet the criteria for Schedule 1, and it never did, is what Gupta says.
And absolutely. And we all know that the only reason it was placed into Schedule 1 was simply from a political purpose that was very Machiavellian in nature.
Absolutely.
And it goes back to Nixon, and whether people want to believe it or not, large part of it was based on racism, is they tied marijuana into heroin.
Oh, absolutely.
And it was based on the issues surrounding the civil rights
You
movement.
have to look
and
at
the Vietnam
historical
War. You
context
have
and
to-
where it came from.
You have to look at the historical context.
Gupta says, if you think about the whole story and you substitute in another medicine other than marijuana into the same story, it would be an outrage. People would be up in arms, referring to the federal government's raids of state legal marijuana dispensary. It flies in the face of what I think many state and federal politicians have telegraphed in terms of the fact that they wouldn't behave this way on an issue, and yet it's still happening. They are behaving this way. So for him, the real problem at the end of the day is, of course, terrible that these guys are going to prison, but that's exacerbated by the patients out there now that aren't able to get what they need because of these laws.
It's all wrapped up. It's really interesting because at the same time that the California Democratic Convention was going on, at the federal level, really the national level, you had the Conservative Political Action Conference, which is the conference that is
CPAC.
CPAC,
as we like to call it. Yeah.
CPAC. That is, it is the conservative wing of the. It's Sarah Palin and it's Rand Paul and it's it's all these conservative darlings that people don't realize how CPAC is incredibly supportive of blowing up the drug war, and specifically marijuana. So I wrote an article over a congressional race recently in my county, in Orange County, and I found this Pew poll and then wanted to discuss how Christopher Beach, the chief of staff for Bill Bennett, took a browbeating, just like, it is the DEA head took a browbeating by Cohen, by his own conservatives who laughed at him. Because he was putting out bad science. And it was interesting. One of them says, well, since you served for Bill Bennett, wasn't it Bill Bennett that had the gambling scandal in the sense of he lost hundreds of thousands of dollars? Shouldn't we make gambling illegal also? And he refused to answer.
He said he didn't want to touch that.
So we want to talk about the Republican hypocrisy party. It's certain branches that need to be extinct. But in 2013, and this shows how this is such a nonpartisan issue, and again, it's creating that safe space. 50% of Republicans and 59% of Democrats, there's not much difference there, say that the federal government should not enforce federal marijuana laws in states that permit its use. That's huge. And then substantial majorities of both Republicans, 67, and Democrats, 71%, also say federal enforcement of marijuana laws is not worth the cost.
Absolutely.
And so, we always talk about these bipartisan politics and how we can't agree. Well, around marijuana, we agree.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So I am thrilled that Sanjay Gupta is doubling down, despite his opposition by Kevin Sabet, Project Sam, and Patrick Kennedy. And so for him to be able to withstand that pressure is going to help us as advocates, because that's every time someone says something, well, medical marijuana is not efficacious. Oh, yeah? Right. Sanjay Gupta says.
Yeah, Project Sam is taking, I would say, an older model, an older paradigm of medical marijuana to combat. They're not combating the real medical marijuana, which is helping patients across the country, which is helping children, older people, everybody
Kevin Sabet has publicly said that patients should go to the illicit black market in order to get their medicine.
Absolutely.
And he also says that there is no violence associated with the illicit black market surrounding marijuana.
But just like
What world does he live
Gilakowski,
in?
just like our the DEA administrator who has to say, not the DEA, but our drug czar who has to say that there's no medical. He's paid. Kevin Sabet is paid to say the things
What he
that he
says.
says. He's a lobbyist. He's a professional guy that it's paid to.
Now
say
it's
these
interesting that he always
Madness.
paints big marijuana with this really broad brush, but it's really interesting that is if you Google Kevin Sabet wedding, he had one of the most over-the-top expensive, like it was premiered on this magazine. 400 people, hundreds of thousands of dollars, I'm sure. He comes from his money. His wife comes from money. And I'm not here to. Good for them.
Good for
of
them.
course.
That's the American dream.
But for him to attack other people who are making money is completely un-American in a capitalist society. And I don't think marijuana is ever going to go like tobacco, because I think it really will be, as we go down the road with regard to legal recreational marijuana, you are going to see the craft beer,
absolutely.
small winery model, that it's going to be the small business owner
That's what
model.
marijuana is suited more to. It's not suited to mass production.
Exactly.
It waters down the effects.
Exactly.
Not that won't happen. It might.
But it's
And it probably will.
And to a certain extent, I'm not saying that it won't happen, but you know what? We as consumers make the choice.
Exactly.
Of course.
So we'll have that's what people will say.
Budweiser Bud.
Exactly. We'll have
To,
the specialty. We'll be the connoisseurs of the medical.
I just want to finish this segment talking about a little bit about Beach and something that he had said. This, let me see who I'm talking about here. This is from Reuters. It was John. Is it Molly Ball? Molly Ball wrote this in Reuters, and she said she was at CPAC, and she said based on let's see. CPAC is a gathering that draws much of its attendance from college student, and it skews libertarian mostly, is what she's positing. Based on that, I wondered if the beating Beach had taken there was an anomaly, not representative of the dynamic in the broader conservative movement. And she put that question to Beach after the panel, but he said no. Basically, every conversation he's had with his fellow conservatives about drugs, he said, turns into a similar browbeating. When Bennett, who also served as Bush's HW drug czar,
He was the first drug
talks
czar.
about the issue on the radio, callers are generally 70-30 against his position. There used to be a strong conservative coalition opposed to drugs, but it's dissipated in the face of mounting public support for legalization. We're fighting against the tide on this. And this is a guy, again, who's paid to be a Republican mouthpiece. So that was a huge thing. We're going to take a break, come back with our last segment, wrap up with some of these important issues and a couple of fun things that have happened this week as well.
Perfect.
When we come back.
Whoop.
Hi, I'm John Lovitz, broadcasting to you from the John Lovitz Comedy Club at Universal City in Hollywood. And I'd like to invite you to come down every Tuesday at 8 o'clock. We tape all these great comics at the John Lovitz Comedy Club, and there is no cover charge, and there's no 2-item minimum. Just come on in, get something to eat if you'd like, and enjoy these fabulous new comedians. And you can see them on the John Lovitz Comedy Network, but come down to the taping live every Tuesday at 8 p.m. at the John Lovitz Comedy Club and Podcast Theater at Universal City Walk in Hollywood.
Hey, we're back. It's Barry and Yami with our guest Diane Goldstein from LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. And we were talking about the CPAC and the Republican convention there, and you had a little side story about that.
Yeah, it's real interesting because I watched another panel, which was a panel on gay marriage that was...
Do you have to be strapped in your chair and like laid down with those weird glasses to watch those panels?
Yeah,
'Cause
I
I
know.
would. I know.
Yeah,
Sorry about that. Go
no,
ahead.
but it's true. You really have to get through it. But this one was really interesting because it was on gay marriage and libertism, and Matt Welch from Reason was on there. I can't remember the guy who had Students for Liberty, as well as Michael Medved, who is the most conservative
Oh, absolutely.
talk radio host. And as they were talking about gay marriage, Michael Medved mentioned something really interesting relative to pro-life issues revolving around the Republican Party. At this point in time, abortions are at the lowest level in our country ever.
Wow. I did
Okay.
not know that.
Yeah, and
But that's great.
No, it is great. And what's really interesting about it, and what Medved pointed out, is that the Republican Party did that without having to legislate a law against it. And they did it through traditional Republican values of education and parenting and outreach. And so what you're seeing, there was an article in the American Conservative that came out roughly around January, is the new conservative millennial Republicans are
Not about legislation.
pro-life, pro-marijuana, and pro-gay marriage.
Cool.
And that is the future of the Republican Party. And demographically, which I kind of joked about in my article, is the old guard is dying out. They are in the La Brea tar pits, gasping their last breath. And
Dinosaurs.
And the other, dinosaurs are standing there looking at them going, we told you needed to evolve. Okay, so that's my bit of...
Oh, that's good. That's good. Very rich. There's news around the country, though. It's not just here in California, Colorado, Washington. There is stuff happening all over. I know in Florida,
Oh, yeah.
the Charlotte's Web medical marijuana cleared their House panel. This is sort of a scaled-down version, I think, of what we would like to see as advocates, which is the acceptance of medical marijuana. It's happening awfully fast, and I feel that some legislatures are reacting to that by saying, you know what, we understand it's happening fast. We're ready to discuss this and make some laws on this, but really small laws, not big, broad programs for my state. So even though Florida is going to be voting on medical marijuana it's very soon in November, I think, this particular issue, this particular legislation is about allowing Charlotte's Web, which is now, I hate calling it that because it's available in any state that you're in. You don't
CBD only legislation.
CBD only legislation, and it's geared toward allowing families the medicine that they need so that they don't have a refugee problem in Colorado in the future. So that's going on in Florida. I know in Washington State, in Washington D.C.
Yeah,
they decriminalized marijuana.
$25.
$25.
It's almost like worth getting caught.
Yeah. So that was a huge step for them. Rather than go through the whole legalization issue, they just decriminalized it and made it a very misdemeanor.
No, not even. It's a ticket.
It's a ticket. It's a $25 ticket.
Which is the case here in California.
Well,
not a $25 ticket.
Ours is $100 tickets. But here's my only problem with some decriminalization. The problem is in California, if you get a $100 ticket and you don't take care of it, it goes to warrant. And it goes to misdemeanor, and you lose your driver's license. So there's all these collateral consequences that people don't understand.
But that's on you if you don't take care of it.
Except for, I think we would be better off if we really qualified it by doing a civil fine, and that the only administrative penalties would be it goes on your credit history.
Instead of you being to have a warrant and go to jail, lose your license.
Yeah, and lose your license, and still you can get arrested for that. Okay, so LEAP basically, it's
sort of understand
it's an incremental step.
It is.
And I'll support it. But it doesn't go far enough because it still will have collateral consequences and criminalize people.
But again, I have to make the point that collateral consequence is on you. I mean, if I get a $100 ticket and I put it in a drawer and I don't pay it,
you're right
for anything.
But it's
I'm screwed.
But it's
They're
like a
cost me
parking.
money
But it should be treated like a parking ticket
and not like a driving violation.
Yeah,
correct.
I see what you're
saying.
Like
Yes,
a parking
absolutely.
ticket.
Yeah.
It's
Or a seatbelt ticket.
or
It's not a
seatbelt-
moving
well, no, a
violation.
seatbelt ticket
It's a
is.
moving violation.
A parking ticket,
It's
you
not a
can't get
moving
arrested
violation,
ever. You can have $100,000 worth of parking tickets, and you're never going to go to jail.
Mm-hmm.
But you're going to lose your house
Yeah.
your car.
and your car and other things.
I see that. I
So-
see that. Hey, we have a little mea culpa to do from our last
Oh, I
show.
Yeah, we're the dope of the week.
We're putting ourselves as our dope of the week. Last week, our it wasn't a dope of the week.
commercial.
No,
There
the
was a
commercial was
dope.
good. We played a
Yeah.
commercial last
Yeah.
week.
Yeah.
It was a minute commercial. It was
Oh, you
touted
got
as
scammed.
it was awesome. It wasn't that much of a scam, but we'll talk about it.
It's like the onion.
It's not like the onion.
No,
It's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
at all
it's
like
an
the
actual
onion.
commercial.
Yeah.
All right, so here's what happened. We showed a commercial that was billed all last week
Yes.
in every news outlet that
Yes.
you could find. There was a headline, first medical marijuana commercial airs on major network. And it was a company that made a commercial. They had the whole commercial made. You could play it on YouTube,
Yep.
which is where most people saw it.
I watched it.
And they had
No,
gone to
instantly.
Comcast and handed in the commercial for approval.
Yeah.
And then they sent out a press release before they got the approval from Comcast. Comcast had not really vetted the whole
Yeah.
situation, but that news release,
Yeah.
the press release that went out,
Yeah.
was just grabbed onto. Partly because nowadays marijuana is that kind of an issue
Yep.
where news just goes, this is sexy, we want to
This-
put something on today about
Absolutely.
marijuana. Well, here it said first medical marijuana on major commercial on a major network. NBC Nightly News,
Yep.
Tom Brokaw
Everybody.
talked about it. CNN talked about it.
Yeah.
No one played
The commercial.
no one played the commercial. It was supposed to air in New Jersey. Comcast did not allow that to happen, so no one played it. But more people probably saw it because of these headlines that
Yeah.
drew you to it. You wanted to go look it up. It had a link to the
Yeah.
to the ad. And so they actually got a lot of play out of this. This
They sure
happens a
did
lot
free.
with
Yeah.
commercials. But we kind of got scammed too because we were like, woohoo,
Yeah.
first medical marijuana.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's put it on. And
Because,
we showed
And
it.
it was
it's
so
the point.
tasteful.
It was a great commercial because
Yeah.
it's like you can buy it. It's like,
It was an
how to make money
awesome-
selling drugs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It really
it was exactly.
It really was an awesome commercial. We love that. I also wanted to go back on a point that you were talking about earlier, Diane, and it was about the harmfulness of drinking. And we were talking earlier about what goes on with that. There was also a story in the news this week, a St. Paddy's Day story. 73 people were arrested at the Blarney blowout at the University of Massachusetts.
Oh.
This is something that goes on every year
Yep.
there. Basically, free
Free-for-all.
free for all, drinking, blowing out. This, what brought my attention to it was this doesn't happen when you get high.
No.
Yep.
You don't have groups of rowdy people throwing bottles at police officers, beating each other up, drunk and disorderly. When they moved, when the police came in and moved people out of the area, they would find thousands of bottles and cans
and
littering
stuff.
the area. This does not happen
Yeah.
with marijuana, and it's important to point that out
Yes.
when something so blaring
Yeah.
happens with
alcohol.
With alcohol, and we go, oh, ha ha ha, the college kids are so whatever. They're not. This is bad. People were hurt. People
Yep.
were arrested. It's going to affect their lives in
Yep.
the future. This does not happen with marijuana, and people should be aware of
So
that.
Yammy's a Dodger fan.
Yes, I'm a Dodger.
Yes.
Brian Stowe. The
What-
guys
with
that
it- yeah, yeah, yeah.
that beat him were drunk.
Drunk.
They were drunk.
They
were drunk.
They were drunk.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. Alcohol is more associated with violence than marijuana ever has been, and I think it's appalling to me that Kevin Sabet and Project Sam continues to take that. Well, we don't want
that's
to.
what we were talking about.
We don't want to open up a third legal drug. Yet we are now seeing scientific studies that are showing. I just read one this morning, as a matter of fact, that are showing that the use of heroin and methamphetamine is down, although the use of marijuana is up. Rand just did this based on
'Cause you can get it
2000 tests.
legally, you don't have to go to jail.
And what they're saying is, there is a correlation. There's not necessarily a causation yet, but one of the things that we're also seeing is that marijuana is an exit drug from harder substances, whether it's psychotropic, whether it's OxyContin, whether it's heroin or something else. And I think, like anything else, is if you are a patient, you can be a patient in various aspects. That should be between you and your medical provider, and we need to get law enforcement out of that.
Yes, we do.
Period. Simple. End of story. From a global perspective, there's two things going on. Is the Open Society Foundation just put out a report called Cannabis, the Rise and Decline of Cannabis Prohibition, Drug Law Reform in Latin America. Uruguay is going to be, that'll be a great read
that's
down the
gonna
road.
be big. Yeah,
and
absolutely.
then this week, you have the United Nations convention going on surrounding the drug war, and LEAP has done an amended single convention drug treaty that we're hoping that it's a starting point. It's not going to be introduced. We now have NGO status, but not for this year, for the following conventions.
Congratulations.
LEAP is
That's
officially
great.
an NGO.
Terrific.
And so we had some LEAP speakers that wrote an amendment to the 1961 Vienna Single Convention
which
to
says,
basically end drug prohibition and move it into, allows individual countries to design their own drug policies and to impose harm reduction on drug policies.
That's the way it should be.
Yeah, so it's a starting point that
no, that's really important. That's an important path to follow.
Yeah,
because one thing that people forget when we start legalizing, Colorado and Washington, there was a lot of discussion of, hey, if they legalize it, don't we have international treaties that we'd be breaking? And we do. It'd be nice to correct that so that we're not breaking international treaties and that they come into the future.
Yep. And everybody's getting blowback on that from the UN. Even Mr. What's-his-face in Uruguay, they really came down hard on him in the Latin American countries.
Yeah, you're great. Yeah. So the other thing, the American Public Health Association today also called for drug decriminalization in the United States.
Oh, that's wonderful.
That's huge.
Huge.
Yes.
That's the organizations that you want to start getting on your side with the science. And that's, I'm sure, what won them over.
Absolutely. And so, again, it's that, man, I got whiplash every day. I open up my feeds and I go, oh, look, there's something more positive.
Hey, real quick, we only have a couple minutes, but I'd like to touch on an article that you posted. You're my Facebook friend, so I find things that you post. Sometimes I don't find them other places. But this was about prosecutorial misconduct. And since you're our law enforcement wing of Talking Marijuana, how do you feel about that? And why don't you tell real quickly what that story was?
So this is a case out of San Diego, and it involved the cultivation of marijuana, as I recall. And what happened was there was a closing statement that the judge found to be unethical, that inadvertently swayed the jury.
It brought something up in closing arguments that was not able to be rebutted in the law.
Correct. So it is literally, it's unethical. And so the judge gently nudged. I think that it was a shove.
Yeah.
And it's the federal attorney general down there.
Yeah.
That it wasn't Dumanis. It's what's her
name?
No,
it was Lisa Duffy.
Lisa Duffy, who's been against marijuana. That she came to the conclusion after this man was convicted. After this man, has he been out on bail? I don't recall the story.
He was out on bail, but he'd gone to a number of courts. The courts should have caught it earlier, but no one really caught it. And finally, this judge shoved Lisa Duffy, and she admitted that she admitted
wrongdoing. Well,
they dismissed the case. They recanted the
they basically said that there was prosecutorial misconduct, and they dismissed the charges.
They dismissed the charges, and but
I don't know if they're going to refile them. That would be my question.
Might. John Maloney was the innocent guy caught up in that.
But the issue is at what point I think she recognized that she was either be embarrassed a little now,
Yeah.
or be really embarrassed when it gets to the Supreme Court.
And she's noted as
And she's noted
doing something
and
unethical.
unethical. And so there's been some interesting stuff going on around prosecutorial misconduct.
We're done.
Done.
They're going to cut us off.
So
Let's hold that thought.
hold that for the next
time.
And when we
Next
talk to you
time
next time, we'll
again.
maybe talk about prosecutorial
Misconduct.
misconduct. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for
Pura
this
Like
hour.
always.
Pura Vida. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Post Gupta.
Yeah.